It's time for that part of the show where we answer your questions. It's time to... And the first question comes from one of our very own staff members. Our supervising producer, Charles, is backstage with a question. Charles, what's going on, friend?
Hey, guys. So I have these 2 moles that I found on my hip. And they're kind of like where, you know, if I was wearing swim trunks or even my underwear, they would be covered. So, I mean, they were a little suspicious looking, but I thought, you know, if they're where, you know, the sun don't shine, am I still at risk to have skin cancer?
Do you run around naked a lot? Or? Well, I had to ask as a caring physician. And you know I love you, Charles. So
no, it's actually a good question because very rarely if you,
I mean, are you saying that it's covered all the time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a nude sunbather, and I'm a fairly modest guy. And, you know, I usually wear swim trunks all the way down to my knees. So why would I have skin cancer on my hip?
Interestingly, Charles, to your question, if you have a mole, even in a place where the sun doesn't shine, you're at biggest risk for the least common but the most deadly type of skin cancer, which is melanoma. And so that's what we worry about from moles. And I think we've done a reasonable job on this show and kind of in the healthcare community of propagating the ABCs of what to look for, which is asymmetry, irregular border, variability of color, and large diameter. Those are kind of just guidelines that dermatologists and other people use when they look at moles. But to your point, you certainly can have atypical or develop atypical moles even in places that are completely sun protected, because we think that there's a component of genetics to that and just bad luck. So those guidelines are really critical if you're looking at a mole yourself and it looks weird to you. And I think if you have questions about it, it's something you should absolutely have looked at. And so I think you're very right to ask this question. And I know you asked it of me last week, which is what gave rise to this segment. So the photos that we were showing were actually Charles's moles in my office. And I looked at them. He had 2, as he mentioned. One was on his right kind of hip, almost at the bottom, and then one was on the right upper thigh, totally in sun-protected places. This photo is the smaller one that was slightly lower down, and the first photo that we showed is the slightly larger mole, and you can see that there's more variability of color there. It's got a slightly indistinct border, and to me, clinically, these actually looked a little bit unusual. So I did biopsy them and looked at them under the microscope, and so the interesting thing is that he actually caught these in time, and it was absolutely the right thing to do because they came back as what we call dysplastic or atypical moles. The lower down one was just a little bit mildly irregular, and so we got the whole thing out into the biopsy, and that's fine. But the top one, which had that variability of color, was a little bit more indistinct, actually did, under the microscope, come back as more moderate to severely atypical. And even though we got the whole thing off, the pathologist really was unhappy with it and has recommended a re-excision. So you can absolutely have these atypical moles, and they exist on a spectrum with true skin cancer. So if you have any questions, please have it checked out and do catch it in time like Charles did.
Charles, it sounds like you're going back to visit Dr. Batra.
Yeah, getting more cut off, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think this also highlights something else. Don't be afraid to check your body in places where the sun don't shine. And that can include areas where it may be more difficult to see things, the back of your body, your buttocks. And so that's why we always say go see a professional like Charles did for regular skin checks if you're at risk. You've done a skin check on me before. I probably do, actually.
You probably are.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes,
this is a question a lot of people have, and we're glad that you are getting cared for by the best of the best.
Thanks, guys.